folks, to our podcast, Therapy on a Tangent. I'm Natalie with my co-host Zori.
Hi!
And this is a podcast where two therapists nerd out about our geeky passions and mental health.
And if the setup looks similar, and also if our clothes look similar, that's because we're recording the second part of our Studio Ghibli conversations.
Yeah, but before we begin, you know the drill, Zori. What have you been geeking out on lately?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I've been reading a lot more books for fun. I've been also reading a lot more graphic novels for fun. Just a few that come off the top of my head. Angelica and the Bear Prince, which has a lot of LGBTQ plus diversity, as well as If You'll Have Me, as well another LGBTQ plus people of color focus graphic novel, and then also Ghost Roast, which is about ghosts, which I like. So I've been reading regular books, but also graphic novels, and I don't know, it's just fun, especially as like someone who grew up reading like mangas and comic books when I was younger. It's like nice to just have like those books as well.
Mm-hmm. And it's nice to have that change of pace of like having visuals opposed to just like reading words all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like one less thing that my brain has to do. Like I don't have to visualize the characters, like they're already visualized. Mm-hmm. What about you?
I've been looking into more couch co-op games recently.
Want to explain what those are?
So couch co-op games are games where you have to be sitting next to somebody and playing together with them. So there's, I think like one of the popular ones that people have been playing a lot of was Overcooked.
Yeah.
That's a huge couch co-op. But I've always loved couch co-op games. But I don't always have people be sitting next to me.
Because you don't invite me over, Natalie.
You live in a different state now.
Okay.
So,
okay, fine.
But I've been wanting to play more couch co-op games because this past New Year's, I was playing Pico Park with some of my friends, and Pico Park is just kind of like a challenging like co-op game where like you have to do tasks, but you have to work together and stuff like that to do it.
Like some of the levels on Fall Guys?
Yeah, sort of. But it's really hard. You have to like, some of them are easier, but like some of it relies on communication and cooperation and things like that. So that's a lot of fun. So I've been looking into couch co-op games recently, just because my husband actually is more willing to play a couch co-op than other games with me. So yeah, I've been looking into that recently, probably just on the Switch because they have a lot more co-op games there. So that's what I've been into recently.
Cool.
So Zori, you saw this article recently about Studio Ghibli movies and our mental health. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, well, there was this online article titled "Study Confirms That Watching Studio Ghibli Films is Great for Your Mental Health." And of course, as a mental health therapist and also a researcher, that got me really interested. And also as someone who's interested in Studio Ghibli, I read the article. I also read the actual research article because that's what I do for fun sometimes. I read research articles for fun. And yeah, basically the study not only looked at Studio Ghibli movies, so again, it's always important to read beyond just the title. But the study was about how open world games, so things like The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, stuff like that, how open world games and feelings of nostalgia, especially feelings of nostalgia from Studio Ghibli movies, affect overall happiness in people in this specific study, in 518 postdoctorate students. So they had some of the participants watch movies like My Neighbor Totoro, like we talked about, Kiki's Delivery Service, and then had them either just watch those movies or had them play games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And basically what it was found is that especially those who did both of them, they experienced more sense of calm, more sense of happiness, or at least they reported happiness. And I can talk all day long about how, reporting sense of happiness doesn't always equal happiness, but at least they reported higher sense of happiness than some other participants. And yeah, I just thought it was a really cool study because again, it put together things I love of research, mental health, and Studio Ghibli, like we talked about before. And I thought it'd be really cool to talk about other ways that using Studio Ghibli movies, especially for the work that we do with clients or just talking about it and like the positive mental health therapeutic aspects of that, how that can be helpful in terms of viewing the movies and what we take away from the movies as well.
Yeah. So what did you get out of some of the Studio Ghibli movies? Like, what kind of themes, mental health things do you see in it?
Yeah, so I think one theme that comes up for me is burnout and rest. And I also think, especially for me, because sometimes that's connected, burnout, rest, and changes. And one movie in particular that I always watch, especially when there's a big change. So I watched it before I moved from my last place, and I watched it again once I was finally settled into my new place, was Kiki's Delivery Service. Because there's a lot of elements about that movie that are about change. And then there's also a lot about that movie that focuses on burnout and the importance of rest and the importance of finding joy and love in the things that you do. And even though it doesn't necessarily spell it out exactly like that, watching that movie just always gives me a sense of peace, because it reminds me, like, yeah, this is new. Some things are going to be hard, but you can move past it. You can have better experiences. It's just, you need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Ideally, if you're able to, take care of your community. And typically when those things are happening, that self-care piece, but also that community care piece that oftentimes I feel like we don't talk a lot about, and how that can be impactful for our mental health. When we have both of those things, we can navigate things in terms of emotions, in terms of thoughts, in terms of actual things that we're experiencing in a more healthier, fulfilled way.
Right. And, Kiki's Delivery Service, actually watching that again as an adult, made me really notice these things you're talking about, like burnout and rest and these things. So can you tell us a little bit about Kiki's Delivery Service, just for those who haven't really seen it before?
Yeah, so Kiki's Delivery Service is one of, or at least what I believe, one of Studio Ghibli's and specifically Hayao Miyazaki's most well-known videos. And it focuses on this young girl. I think she's like 12 or 13.
13,
yeah 13. And which is wild, because at the very beginning of the movie, she's like, I'm 13, I'm an adult, I'm gonna move away from home, travel miles and miles away to live by myself, which apparently is a thing.
It's a normal thing here.
And so she decides, when she turns 13, she decides to basically take her broom, take her cat, her talking cat Gigi, and to take her bag, like this little small bag, and that's all she does, and flies away to become a witch, to grow in her powers and stuff like that. And she lands in this town. I don't remember if the town has a name, but she lands in this town where there's a lot of progress. It's really busy. It's a big city, and there she's trying to kind of find her place and to kind of understand where she fits in. And eventually she starts a delivery service out of the attic of this bakery, which, side note, the husband, the baker of the bakery, hear me out. Yes. Love that. Anyway, but she starts this delivery service, and it has a lot of highs, but it also has a lot of lows. And there's certain points where she starts to self-doubt herself, and even a point where she loses her magic. And that, especially as someone who viewed her identity as a witch so highly, that was she essentially went through depression. It was very obvious that she was going through a depression state at that time. And what was really cool is she has a friend who's just like, yeah, sometimes you need to, take some time away from this thing. Even though you love it, you need to take some time. You need to explore things so you can fall back in love with this thing again. And essentially at the end, she gains her magic back just in time to save her friend / love interest from falling off of a giant air balloon that's about to crash and stuff like that. So it's, like I said, it's a really good movie in terms of thinking about change, in terms of thinking about burnout and rest and self-care. And again, at least for me, I feel like at the times when change is happening, I feel the most stressed and I feel the most burnt out.
Right. And that's probably when you try to do more things too, because like when you move, it's like, I got to put my life back together. And so like you start to do more than your capacity and you start to burn out. And it's one of my favorite quotes from that movie was when Kiki said, I loved flying until it became my job. And that was so real because I think lots of people go through this, especially like people who are figuring out like their careers, their jobs and things like that. They'll say things like, oh, I love drawing. I have a passion for drawing. But if this becomes my job, am I going to hate it? Am I going to resent it? And so I think like that's such a real struggle for people to go through. And I think that's something that we don't always like pay attention to if we're not thinking about it. And I give kudos to my clients who actually take that time to think about like, if I turn one of my passions into an occupation, will I still enjoy it? Will this be something I can continue doing? Or am I just going to burn out and absolutely hate what I'm doing? And so like, I think this was such a good illustration of like, what happens when we take something we're passionate about and then it just becomes a job that we, grind day in and day out and just trying to make money. And you just lose like, why did I even want to do this?
Yeah, especially for us as millennials, I feel like oftentimes, or at least growing up, it was like, oh, you do this thing, turn into a side hustle, like try to get money out of it. Like I remember when my mom found out I was writing fan fiction, she was just like, why are you spending so much time writing fan fiction? Why don't you actually write a book and actually get it published so you can get paid? And I'm just like, I just want to have fun and talk about these characters and maybe make them kiss because they didn't kiss in the actual canon. So like, so yeah. And especially, again, like I also like to watch Kiki's delivery service at the beginning of the school year, especially since I started teaching because teaching is something that I actually do find a lot of joy in, but sometimes, especially when you get in the midpoint of the semester and the end point of the semester, when you're tired and your students are tired, it can be like, why am I doing this? Especially like in our field where like I know people who they're not working in academia, they're doing other things with their degrees, whether it's masters or masters and PhDs, and they're making so much more money. Like, spoilers to anyone who doesn't know anything about academia, professors, especially nowadays, don't make a lot of money. We're broke. And also like any articles, authors, like books that are published, oftentimes we don't get money for that. I don't get money for the articles I publish. Yes, academia is a scam. I am a fool with a PhD. Let me stop.
Before you get too deep into it.
Triggered.
But I guess that's where like rest is important too, like trying to make sure you take a break from your job or like the things that you enjoy. And it's something that's kind of cool that you see in the movie is that like the baker lady that allows Kiki to operate out of her bakery, even she was the one that encourages like this good work-life balance of like, hey, take a break.
Yeah.
If you need some time, just like take as much time as you need away so that you can like get your powers back, feel refreshed. And I think that's something that we all look for to surround ourselves with people who are in this camp of like, hey, take some rest, take care of yourself. Don't just do the grind. Because I guess maybe this is part of a millennial mindset too, is that like we have to grind in order to get the things that we want. And that comes with a huge sacrifice too. Like sometimes that sacrifices our passions, that sacrifices our time, our relationships. And then you start losing kind of like that joy in life. Yeah. And I think like we're both big proponents of like still living in our like childhood in a way too, still having like that sparkle in life. We're trying to continue our sparkle. But like we can't do that if like we take everything that we love and turn it into a side hustle.
Yeah. And honestly, so on Instagram, when I was doom scrolling on Instagram, I saw this thing where it was saying, and I think this applies to Kiki a lot, where we need people, community, people who we trust, who not only encourage us, like, yeah, you can do this, you can keep on delivering, you can keep on, hustling and stuff like that. But we also need friends and community who say, it's okay if you don't. And like really highlight and emphasize that even if you don't do something, even if you do fail at something, that failure doesn't mean that you're a failure. Like that you can separate the two. Like
Right.
you can not have things work out the way that you want it to, or the way that you hold yourself up to or expect to. In that instance, that time, that disappointment doesn't mean that you're a failure. And I think that's also something that we see with Kiki as well, and all, because we see it from the bigger lady, we see it from the artist lady, I'm forgetting all their names. We also see it from the guy who kind of has a crush on Kiki as well. They all in some way, shape, or form are just like, hey, have fun. You know, it's okay. Like, you don't need to always be on. You don't need to be like this boss girl mindset. Like, yeah, that's great. But like, if you keep doing that 24/7, you're going to like burn out and crash. So I think that's also something really good to think about with Kiki's as well. Yeah. And again, Kiki is another character. Miyazaki likes to have girls, women as his main characters. And I don't remember the exact line or quote that he said, but it's basically because like they're so inspiring. Like he wants to, any girls, especially the girls and women that he knows in his life, to know that they can do these things too. And I think that brings up like another thing that comes up in Miyazaki movies, which is the idea of girlhood, femininity, and identity. And again, it's important to note that these movies are from a Japanese studio, done by a Japanese director. Everyone is Japanese and is influenced by the Japanese culture. And I think there's an element of, you have to be aware of that in terms of understanding how some of these characters come off. I know in our last video, we talked about Sophie from Howl's Moving Castle, and how, especially when we were younger, we were just like, she's a hero. She's she like, what is she doing?
Yeah, she's
and
boring.
and it wasn't until like when we were older where we were able to like fully realize that. But even though there is that cultural difference, I think there's still a lot that we can take away in terms of girlhood and femininity in regards to some of these movies. So just a few that come off the top of my head again are like Sophie from Howl's Moving Castle, Chihiro from Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke from Princess Mononoke, and I'm forgetting the main female character in Castle in the Sky, but the main female character in Castle in the Sky, I think they all are really good examples of the different ways that girlhood and femininity play out. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool too, kind of to see like these different versions of girlhood and femininity in all these different movies. Because, you know, you talked about the cultural context of things too. So like Japanese culture, very conservative in, you know, what people thought of women and their roles and things like that. But also because each of these movies were dated in different time periods too. So, and it was also created in different time periods too. So the progression of like what was expected of women was, I guess, like more stay-at-home mom, you know, or you need a husband to thrive. You need somebody in your life in order to be a somebody, right? And so it's cool that like it almost feels like these movies challenge that idea of like what normative female roles are or what's expected in society. But it has such a great illustration of like even women of different personality types can in a way create like their own life, their own success in whatever story they're in.
Yeah. And as you were talking in regards to like women being stay-at-home moms and stuff like that, I think another thing that makes it so great that these movies have female character leads, they're the ones who are like pushing the story forward, is again thinking back to the fact that these are created from like a Japanese culture, so there's the idea of collectivism. But again, as we were talking about before about the importance of not only self-care but community care, I think they, especially for us as like a Western audience, are really important because they show that all of these women and girls, they relied on people.
Yes.
even like Princess Mononoke, who is a total badass, she relied on other people. She relied on her, of the other spirits of the forest. She relied on the main male character in some points and stuff. So there's always that aspect of community, which I think, not to say that that can't happen if there was a male lead, but I think community is more so associated with femininity to a certain extent, if that makes sense. And I think that's just really interesting. Like I think when we think of women, when we think of girls, we think of like they have community, they have people that they know and stuff like that. And I think that's something, an important takeaway from these stories, that is not only an element of how they get things done, how they move the plot forward, but also important to who they are and their motives and stuff like that.
Yeah, and maybe that's something that really resonated with me when I watched these movies too, just because like I do come from a collectivistic culture, so I think it was very nice just to see that contrast. Because growing up in America, like a lot of what's pushed forward is like individualism, like you gotta be strong, you gotta be powerful, you gotta, you know, look out for yourself, and then that's it. But like a lot of these characters, like they're strong, they're strong in their own ways, but part of the strength is being able to ask for help when you need help, and drawing on a community, which I think is like something that does come up a lot, I feel like, in therapy when I'm talking to like young girls or even like young men too, because I think it's just so ingrained in their minds that in order to be strong, I need to do it. I have to do it on my own. I have to figure it out. But then they don't recognize that part of strength too is like knowing your own limitations, knowing what you're able to do and what you're unable to do, and finding people who could help contribute to like the cause that you have. And so I think like that's such a great illustration to break out of that idea of like individualistic culture, and also make it almost like normal. Like it is normal to ask people for help, and that's a big part of like who we are as people. We're not meant to be solitary people. We're social creatures by nature, and so like that is a core part of who we are as people.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to highlight that we're talking about being interdependent, so not independent, but also not codependent. Like finding that balance between having appropriate just relationships with people where it's not like where you're not your own person, where there's not that enmeshment, but also realizing that, like you said, we can't do everything by ourselves. We need to have community. We need to be in community. And, you know, there's been research that shows in even our own work that when people do have that community, when they do have that support, when they are not afraid of being like, hey, Natalie, I'm sad. Send me baby pictures, please. You know, and don't have that shame about asking for help. That's when we can be, again, interdependent, and really rely on find healing in our communities and stuff like that. And again, it's something that whether you identify as female, male, gender expansive, non-binary, whatever, because gender is not binary. It's still something that I think, unfortunately, we associate a lot with femininity, and something that I do wish, hopefully, as we continue on in this world, that more men, more boys realize that, like you said, it's not a weakness to rely on people. But again, I think it would be, these movies would be slightly different if they didn't have these female characters.
Right. Yeah. And I think like it provides a perspective for people too about like what femininity could be. Like Princess Mononoke is one of my favorite movies, just because like what you said, like she's pretty badass, right? She's like running with these wolves. She's part of the pack. And you know, in a way where it seems like this could be a typical like hero story where like this boy from this kingdom wants to swoop in and save this girl who's just like living out in the wild in the woods with these wolves, and I'm gonna bring her in civilization and it's gonna be good. But like she, like in the end, you'll see that like he asked her like, oh, come with me to my kingdom, but she's like, she was like, yeah, we were a great team, like trying to save the forest and all that, but I'm gonna go and still be part of my wolf pack and protect the forest that way, you know, like, and that's like such a great picture too of like what you're talking about with the interdependency. It's like, she's not codependent. She doesn't need to be rescued by somebody. You know, she is perfectly capable of being her own person, and she is able to accept help from this boy so that they could work on a common cause, right? And so I think like that's such a great illustration of like what we seek in relationships, where it's like, my identity is not going to be tied with somebody else's, because I think then that erases your own identity. That's what creates the codependent relationship, when you no longer have your own identity. But like Princess Mononoke, like, this is like her life. She's like, this is who I am. I am one with the wolves. I'm going to stay in the forest and I'm going to protect it. And that was it. And they still, like, you can see them just like being side by side, but like working towards the same cause, but not having to be together all the time.
Yeah. And we're talking a lot about some of the main characters who are often young women, or they are young women. But I think also another really great thing about these movies is they also have older women. And like, yeah, you can tell that they're older women, but they're still also badasses themselves. Like, I'm thinking of Yubaba from Spirited Away.
Oh, yeah.
There's Yubaba and her sister, who Chihiro calls Granny. I mean, I think she calls them both Granny at the end. But like, they're both, one is like, you know, she's a little bit like consumer focused, a little bit capitalistic, but like, she's powerful. Like, she may be old. We don't know how old, but she's definitely old. But like, she still is very powerful. She's still very respected. And the same thing with her twin sister, Zeniba, that's as well. And then also in Howl's Moving Castle, again, as we talked about in our previous episode, which if you haven't watched, watch it. I'm going to put the link somewhere. But in Howl's Moving Castle, Sophie did a lot when she was old. A lot of the positive changes that happened, not only for Howl, but the people around her, happened when she was an older lady, as well. And Princess Mononoke, I'm forgetting her name, but there's also like
the Iron
Lady. She has an actual name. We're just really bad with names. But even that character, she is older, and you could even say she's jaded. She may not be like Granny levels old, but she's definitely jaded. And even though you can view her as the bad guy, and that a lot of the things that she's doing makes sense. Like, I wouldn't do it, but I can understand how she got to that place.
Like, she still had good intentions, which, you know, this is where it's like, you have good intentions, and then there's a question of like, what are your morals and things like that, what are your values? But it doesn't mean that, like, you know, she was a bad person. It's just that she knew what she wanted. She wanted to protect Irontown. She wanted to care for these women who came out of a brothel, you know, and like, that was her intentions. Like, she wanted to support these people. And so the result, based on her morals and values, what led her to those actions.
Yeah, and then in Castle in the Sky, there was another older woman character. She basically ran like a group of like air pirates. Air pirates itself. Again, older woman, still very badass. And I think again, it shows that there's like, no matter what age, even though a lot of the main characters are younger women, young girls, it still shows that there's power in womanhood, that just because you become a mom, just because you become an older person, because your values, your morals don't necessarily align with the main character, there's complexity within their identities that I think is important to focus on as well. And to also think about for ourselves, as we're watching these movies, because we're not one-dimensional. Yes, we are two therapists talking about our geeky passions, but like, we're more than that, you know?
Yeah, and I think what I like too is just the themes that came out in like these movies about identity and girlhood are so real to what you experience as you are transitioning through different life stages too. So like, Howl's Moving Castle, a lot of it is about like being confident in who you are and your identity. And that's such a real thing as you're growing up. Like, how do I be comfortable in my own skin, be proud of who I am? And even like in Spirited Away, like all that insecurity that you have, like, I don't know how to do things, to like, I'm going to save the world kind of feeling. You know, like those are all very real themes that you go through in girlhood, and figuring out like, how do I become somebody who is respected in society, and how can I hold my own power despite what the world may think of me, whether or not like I fit in. Because I think you could argue that a lot of these characters don't, in the traditional sense, fit in with the other girls in the time period that movie takes place in, right? And so like, I think that's what resonates with people sometimes when you look at those movies and you're like, yeah, I know exactly what it felt like when I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, and I didn't know how to be confident in myself, and I didn't know how to do stuff.
Yeah. And I think that also, like, in terms of understanding ourselves, I think these movies are really important in terms of understanding the world around us as well. And a lot of these movies also have a lot of environmental and like world meanings that I think a lot of times when people think of mental health and think of therapists, they don't think of like eco justice or, you know, climate justice, stuff like that. But we know that when we're thinking about our clients, we're thinking about our clients holistically. And we know that there are a lot of things, especially now, that are happening that maybe our clients don't realize, like, oh yeah, this is related to global warming, but like we can make that connection, and we can see how things are happening in terms of our environment, or things are happening in terms of like world politics, how that is instigating some of these not so great mental health issues. And I think Studio Ghibli movies, but again, specifically Miyazaki movies, there's always some element of either environmental issues and climate stuff, or like world issues like war and stuff as well that's happening. Maybe not always in the forefront, but like somewhere in the background.
Right. Yeah. And like that, it's the context of the story that it takes place in. And I think that's something that we don't think too much about in our own mental health. But I think like that's what contributes to people's feelings of like anxiety, especially that existential anxiety that people feel. Because how could you not be worried about the world if like, you know, that our glaciers are melting and, you know, we're like land masses are slowly sinking into the ocean, or we're polluting our earth.
Yeah. Or AI factories are polluting our water. Right. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to talk about that, right?
Yeah, but that's such a real thing, because, you know, I talk with a lot of clients about like, you know, when the environment that we're living in is cluttered, our brain becomes cluttered too. And so that's what creates that anxiety. Like if our physical space is a mess, our brain feels like it's a bit of a mess. But then when we externalize that to the world, and then the world feels like a mess, like that's even worse.
Yeah, especially because like, though sometimes it's not always easy for some people, when our homes, our apartments, our rooms are messy, we still technically, or for the most part, have control over cleaning that. But when it goes to the greater, larger world, that feels even harder, especially for one individual. And again, kind of going back to like this like idea that we need to focus on these things together, I think is really important. And realizing that these larger world issues, if they aren't addressed collectively, and again, you know, this is where some of that Japanese culture may be coming into, again, if we don't address this collectively, then this does have impacts on us. Obviously in these movies, like I'm thinking about Howl's Moving Castle, there was like a war going on and lots of people were getting hurt, lots of towns were getting bombed. Specifically in the movie, a lot of wizards were turning into these weird magical creatures for the good of the kingdoms and stuff as well. And then the idea was that they would never be able to turn human again. And again, seeing all of that happening for these things that in the end are just going to cause more hate, more trauma, more, it can definitely feel like, what can I do? And then, as we know, that can send people into a spiral sometimes and make them feel like, what's the point?
Right. And I think this is where like it matters as a society what we put our values in. And I think like this is where sometimes we have to think about the whole instead of the individual, right? Because if like, yeah, you as an individual, you can't change anything about the environment or the society that we live in. But if we all share a very similar mindset about what we want to value as a society, that has changed, right? I'm thinking about how, like, clearly, we live in a very capitalistic society, but that's only propelled because there are lots of people who put value in making money in capitalism. And perhaps that's part of like an older generation that is much more powerful in this day and age. But, what happens when we as a society collectively say like, hey, we don't care as much about money as we do care about like whether or not we have an earth to live on in the next couple decades. Right. And so like I think like that's the nice contrast that Miyazaki movies have, where a lot of it is emphasized on like, yes, you could have all this power, you can have all this technology, but then once you get sucked into those things, then like what's the meaning of life anymore? Like what are we trying to do here? And so like a lot of the characters go back to like like protecting the environment, trying to invest in the things that are nourishing to them. Like I just Castle in the Sky was the most recent one that I watched. And I think that's what had such a really big contrast on like the different values that you can have in society, right? There's the princess who, wanted to preserve the garden in the castle. And then there's the other guy, the other royal who claimed to be the king. He wanted the power. And basically it's like power to control other people. And it's so destructive. And so like in the end, the princess was able to destroy that weaponized part of the castle and preserve the garden. And so I think like that's the big contrast of like, if we invest so much in power, we lose ourselves in it. And then we don't think about like, what are the ramifications it has for other people? What do we lose along the way?
Yeah, and also like think about like who has power as well, because again, and I think maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like this is probably like one of the few Miyazaki movies or Studio Ghibli movies, or at least the ones that I've seen where there's an actual bad guy. Because I don't think there was any redeeming qualities with that. With that guy, but I think that guy was like an older guy though, an older man, and he was making this decision to basically be destructive, and it took this younger girl, this younger generation to be like, hey, that's not good. And I feel like, especially again, not to go on my soapbox again, but I feel like that's kind of where we are at now, where we're just like, hey, why are people who either don't have direct experiences or don't have knowledge, or who are older and this won't impact them later on in life, making decisions for the rest of us that is going to impact people. And again, just thinking about like personally how some of the stuff that's happening in the world today is impacting me. And like, I'm a trained therapist, or so my diploma says. It's like I'm at least to a certain extent able, again, I have my own therapist, but at least to a certain extent, I'm able to like take a step back and be like, okay, the world is crazy. And, you feel that way because it is. And I'm at least able to take a step back and at least able to know what tools or what resources I need for that, but not everyone has that. And then that kind of spirals out into sometimes not fully understanding what's the cause of these mental health related issues and finding quick fixes that put a band-aid on something that's like a crack in the damn wall, like it doesn't fix it. It's like you're using a Band-Aid with something that needs actual surgery.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the world that we live into, that we're trying to find like the quick fixes too. And I think this is also about a comfort thing too. I think there's something comfortable in the predictability of something bad happening, right? Whereas it's harder for us to take the risk to do something different, not knowing what that difference is going to affect or cause in the future. And so I think that's why like we have such a hard time being able to stand up against like what are the current societal values and norms, because there's just so much unknown, and we find comfort in knowing that like, well, if it's gonna suck, at least I know what kind of thing is gonna happen, right? Like I know what kind of crap is coming in my way.
Yeah. And then, so like kind of thinking back to like the original study that we were talking about earlier, I can see how these, like, especially some of these older, like, Studio Ghibli movies, the nostalgia, it's helpful. Just one, because of just like the overall qualities of these movies. Like, they're so well done. And it's an art that unfortunately is not, because I think everything's hand drawn, which unfortunately we don't see a lot of anymore in animated movies, which, not to say that there aren't quality animated movies that, you know, don't use that medium, but I don't know, it's just something, an extra value, especially like when you look at the food, is so good. But anyway, I think the reason why Studio Ghiblis are so nostalgic, whether or not they actually have a significant impact on mental health, but like at least in the time where we're watching it, it feels like comfy, it feels cozy, is because it's in a world where people realize like, oh yeah, that wasn't a good idea. Or the main character is able to figure out a way to stop the power hungry capitalistic bad guy from like doing something. And I think that's something that we wish that we had, and find comfort in a world where, at least in that world, it happened like that.
Right. It's almost like giving you hope for the future, like a wishful thinking kind of thing. And I think part of like the nostalgia too that kind of gets to us is like it really brings us to a simpler time too. Like when you get so far into like the technology and the capitalism, then you, like we've talked about it before, like with increased technology, life gets more complicated. And I think to a certain extent, perhaps as humans, we're not meant to be more complicated, because we make these jokes about like, oh, I just want to move onto a farm and, you know, just like homestead or something, you know,
live
like
my Stardew Valley
right.
life.
There's a reason why our comfy gaming is all about like farming
or tiny bookshops.
Yeah, like living in a small town, right? Like I don't think we want more complicated, but that's where our society is going towards. And so I think like the world that the Studio Ghibli movies put us in is just like, there's just a much more simpler time, less complicated, and I think that's what frees us of anxiety, when we could just like detangle our lives from some of the more complicated things that we don't have control over.
Yeah. And again, like there are worlds where community is so important. Because again, thinking back to like Stardew Valley and the tiny bookshop, like there's still elements of community in that game where, you know, if you want that community, you can get that community. And it's not, again, it's not shameful. It's not like you're weak by asking for help, or it's just like, you know, something that I think, again, we, especially in the US, we don't rely on. We've become so independent, starting maybe even all the way back from like the idea of like the nuclear families in like the 50s, 60s, something like that. And how that and other things have, you know, again, really emphasize independence. You need to do this by yourself. Where again, we as humans have always been creatures, beings, whatever, that worked in community. And I think, again, we need to really focus on that and focus on building interdependent relationships and not just independent relationships and stuff like that. And yeah, I think that also like digs into like the nostalgia piece, especially like thinking about like some of the Studio Ghibli movies that we watched when we were younger, like at an age where we had to depend on like family and stuff like that. I think that also like brings stuff up for us.
Yeah, and I think that's part of like a simpler time too, where like we didn't have to, like it felt okay to be interdependent on people.
Yeah, like I'm small, I'm just a baby.
Right.
Now I can't say that anymore. Like I'm not just a baby, even though I'm like always looking for the adultier adult, and I'm like, oh, I'm the adultier adult.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we have to learn to re-embrace as a society, that it's okay to be interdependent. Like it should be socially acceptable that we ask for help, that we want to lean on other people and, you know, work toward a greater good as a collective, opposed to just trying to be like one powerful entity.
Yeah.
Well, Zori, we've talked about a lot of things. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think, again, just watch Studio Ghibli movies. They're really wholesome, very whimsical.
Yep, if you want wholesome and whimsical, that's what the Studio Ghibli movies are. So
yeah, except for Graveyard of the Fireflies. Don't start off with that. No.
There are some sad things in Studio Ghibli movies, but I think
the ones that we talked about today, go for it.
Yeah, the sad ones are good too, but you know, you just need to be prepared for it. All right, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Therapy on Tangent. If you liked what you listened to today, remember on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to give us a rating and a review. And if you're listening on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that bell button. And if there's a topic you would like to hear about in the future episode, either put that in the comments or email us at therapyonthetangentpod@gmail.com. So I'm Natalie.
And I'm Zori.
Until next time, stay on the tangent. Bye.
Bye.